Okay, so now I'm going to run you through the modern version compared to that article where we're talking about laser discs, the modern version of anchored instruction and aligning it to the use of digital video. So the theory of anchored instruction, you kind of get it, right? From the article, the idea is we talk about having this kind of post-World War II societal demand to be able to educate students that can problem solve. So that's where our whole problem-based context shows up, because we have markets competing with each other. Then we have this movement towards technology literacy. So that starts to get implemented in the 70s. And so now we have this kind of techno-constructivist approach that kind of confronts the old paradigm face on. So what is it? Well, it's obviously an instructional technique based on the research in the cognitive sciences. So basically social psychology, how we learn from each other, and cognitive psychology, how we actually learn and memorize material. And obviously extrapolated out to other places because that was a big focus on the article. So there's a background that's presented about a problem, that's a video, and then this rich context provides an anchor for mental frame or focus for the content that's going to be studied. So it has to be rich enough that it actually incorporates what you need to pull out of it curriculum-wise. So these visuals provide a mental model that's easier accessed in memory because there's multiple sensory inputs. We have, they're seeing the story, they're seeing setting, they're hearing the characters interact in the story, and it's contextual in nature because there's actually a story. So the idea is we focus on authentic real-world tasks to solve problems and apply material from the coursework. So how do we do this thing? Well, first of all, we need to figure where we're going to get this anchor from, whether it's something that's mass-produced or Hollywood-produced versus something that's grassroots that you're going to go out with a camera and film something. But the idea is the same independently of what the anchor is that we're choosing. So we need to provide the learners with a rich context for what we're talking about. It has to be a shared context. So if you have students with very different experiences in your classroom, so for instance, you have second language learners that are coming from a different country in the same room that we have students that never left the county, that gives them a shared context for them to both speak on at the same time because they've been exposed to that stimulus. And of course, it's supposed to generate student interest in the curriculum while enabling them to identify and explore the learning content, the context from many different perspectives. That's the social learning aspect, right? The fact that we're actually engaging with each other as we go through the process. Okay, so there's 4 different phases to what we do now in modern anchored instruction. So the students watch the video anchor, then there's retelling and segmenting. That's almost a processing activity. So you're kind of bringing it down, you're boiling it down to its fundamentals. Then we go through this characterization, and then finally student research. Now, a note on characterization, of course, if we're using archival material at history, so biographies, etc., that we're watching, there's still characters there, so you can still have students characterize those individuals. So if we break down the 4 phases, in phase 1 we have the students watching the video anchor. So the class watches the film together to develop this shared context that I just discussed. So then what we do is something a little bit different. Often in the classroom, students are allowed to identify problems, but rarely are they allowed to offer the solution to the problem. So in this process, we'd identify the problems, but we'd have them speculate on what they think possible solutions are without having ever researched them. Again, we're looking for them to identify the concepts in the anchor because those should be the curriculum benchmarks that you're trying to pull out anyway. Good thing about doing it this way, especially if we're doing a digital video file like an MP4 or a MOV type file, AVI, if you're over in Windows platform, it allows you to obviously review the segments, again, for clarification. So if anybody has any speculation, any questions about that problem, we can always replay it and interpret it as a group. Okay, so then in phase 2 we go on to retelling and segmenting. What I do traditionally with my classes is if I have a main plot line, I'll have them lift out the main plot line. So they'll take the digital video, they'll run it through either Windows Movie Maker or Windows Live Movie Maker or iMovie in a Mac platform, and basically they'll chop it down to a synthesis of what was originally 22 minutes into 7 minutes in length. That way that we can kind of boil it down without the superfluous subplots, etc. So for instance, when I do this with my undergraduate students, I'm teaching them the dangers of, basically dangers of school age internet use, internet safety. We use Disney's The Smart Guy, and I have them chop down an episode that's 22 minutes into basically 7 minutes that talks about basically child predators. Again, relevant to them, they probably watched it when they were children. A lot of them are familiar with it already, and it allows them to become very familiar with the scope and sequence of that particular production, with that particular piece of media, and all the items are there that I need to pull out from the anchor that meet my curriculum needs in terms of the nets for teachers. So the NETS *T. Which is what I'm responsible for in teacher education. But you can break it down in terms of plot sequence or character appearances. So for instance, if we're doing this with Romeo and Juliet in a language arts classroom, we could have it appear so every time that Romeo and Juliet actually appear in the same scene, we could lift those out and separate those out into a coherent whole that we're seeing them interact directly without all the other stuff in the way. In the characterization, traditionally, again, this is done with media that centers around characters. So in the characterization, we talk about a traditional characterization. What's the person like? That's the idea. And then students in groups or individually are assigned a character, and then they have to produce a 30-second clip or 30 seconds or less that best represents that character from the story and the traits that they're trying to justify. Then the class is allowed to debate this, to say whether this is a true characterization or not, or add or remove from it. Again, there's your social learning component coming into play once again. Finally, we divide them up into groups, and then basically any curriculum benchmarks that we're looking to meet. So again, for myself, if I'm teaching safety and computer usage or device usage, there's several classifications or several areas of content that I need to deliver. One is, the legal aspects of bootlegging and copyright and how they are different than each other, and how students go about doing that. So they're aware of that as teachers. On the other side of that is the protections that schools employed and classrooms can employ to try to keep kids safe. So we talk about filtering mechanisms, acceptable use policies. We talk about the procedural things, as well as the educational strategies that can go into actually working with the students to socialize them to the idea of what a safe strategy is versus a non-safe strategy. Then we can talk about other things like communication with children, because that also comes out of that clip. So how to best effectively speak to children in terms of best practices across the age spectrum. And then finally, if trauma does occur in the classroom, exactly how we remediate that, how we approach the aftermath of that trauma in dealing with our students, dealing with the class as a whole. So what they have to do is, in their group, they create this multimedia presentation. So you're including audio and video, usually an original clip from the anchor. So we draw back to the anchor again. And the students effectively drive that process. So they're given a rubric on what's expected to appear, but which way they approach it, on the other hand, is up to them. And the teacher steps into a coaching role and works the room. So let's give you a couple of examples. So an early childhood math example. So basically in this example, this one is a really good replacement for something that I saw happen when I was teaching in Brazil. So we had a kindergarten teacher that decided to take her students across a very busy street, so 4 lanes of one-way traffic in the downtown core of Rio de Janeiro to go and buy groceries. So we're going to basically classify fruits and vegetables as an indicator, as an outcome. And then we're going to have some math done because the kids are going to have $10 of local currency, and they're going to basically cash themselves out and make sure they have the right change. I know at kindergarten that's a little much, but the classification aspect was correct in terms of classifying things into categories. So what happened was she took everybody over there. She took her 20 plus kids, and she recruited some parents to manage the kids while they're over there, etc. And it was fine. Everybody made it there and made it back. The only problem is, when they go to cash out, number one is they take over the store because there's 20 plus kids in the store with adults. But number two is when they go to cash out, there was one cash register open. So that first child that cashed out had to wait for the last child. And you know how kindergarten students are fantastic at waiting a half hour. Well, they basically have nothing to do. So this proposal here replaces that. So in the way that this would be done through anchored instruction is we would take 1 or 2 students over, obviously getting permission from their parents, so we'd have a waiver signed. And we take them over with a camera to the local grocery store and film them, again, asking them probing questions about how many fruits they have now, how many vegetables they have now, what's this, is this a fruit, is this a vegetable, etc. And then what happens is we take that film back to the classroom, we do a little editing cleanup, and we would stop the film at those probing questions. So we'd ask the question, and then we'd ask the class to speculate on the answer and work our way through the logic of what the correct answer is to any of those questions. Then to simulate this, so our next process would be how we use a processing activity. Right? In the traditional model, it's segmenting, so we're boiling it down. With younger kids, I would basically take and use a processing activity that's something more kinesthetic. So I would have them bring in stuff like empty boxes of cereal or cans that we're going to end up donating to a food drive later on, and label them, and we actually have different classifications of stuff in the classroom so they know how to separate and categorize. And then if we were actually working with the math skills, I would have them work through, and half would be vendors, so they'd be selling the stuff and have their own little stores with all the stuff in it, and half would be purchasers, and we'd whip out all the monopoly money in the world to do that. In another example, if we use a Hollywood production, because that was a homegrown one in the other one, so what we would do is we would have students view what's going on in the film, much like in the article they were talking about the Indiana Jones and jumping over the gap process. So what we would do is we'd identify all the vehicles in the film. We'd identify the rate and speed. So is it possible for the bus to actually jump the gap in the bridge, given the amount of space that's there, the velocity it's traveling at, and its weight? And then they'd actually write up a physics proof discussing that particular incident, and then most likely share with the class their findings. If we look at a traditional literary version of anchored instruction, we can see how it cuts across the curriculum. So we're not only limited to the literary features in the story and what's going on within the story, but we talk about history, the Depression era, we talk about literary themes of money, power, human relationships. In terms of branching over into social studies, we'd be talking about the judicial process and segregation as well. So you can see how we can kind of house everything cross-curricularly under the same roof if we do this correctly, and we can have different students feed into those strengths as well in terms of outcomes. When you do something like this, it's usually defined as a 4-stage instructional or ID development. So we talk about defining, so what you want to teach. Design, you pick your anchor basically and figure out how you're going to use that anchor effectively to line up to your curriculum. So then you develop it with whatever handouts you have, like if you have a characterization worksheet or you have your rubrics attached to your final projects, etc. And then hopefully you disseminate that kind of stuff out. So benefits, well, there's contextual learning. So again, it's learning within a story. There's active involvement of the learner in the activity. So it is very student-centered. Social construction of knowledge because they're interacting constantly as either a large group or small groups. Development of problem-solving skills. So again, if we talk about the extrapolation out from one thing to another, my students should be able to extrapolate out that, if they're noting the copyright is this, it's this phenomena, they shouldn't be doing infringement of copyright over here, which is in the writing of their papers, etc. at Ashland. Enhancement of knowledge transfer, again, since there's social learning and it's student and problem-based, I would say that's probably what's leading towards the enhancement of knowledge transfer. And the promotion of student ownership of knowledge. They say there are challenges. I really doubt they exist anymore. So the role change for the teacher and the student, well, I mean, we really want them to be at the focus in today's times. So yeah, that's already out there. The time required to develop an anchored unit shouldn't be any longer than developing a regular unit because these things do take time and we never teach out of the book. Content and video support necessary to assist teachers. If you don't have those skills, you should start acquiring those skills in terms of video production and how to edit things. So I do suggest if you're a Windows user, use the built-in app in the OS, which is Windows Live Movie Maker or Windows Movie Maker, depending on which version of the operating system you're using. And if you're a Mac user, for goodness sakes, learn how to use iMovie because it can be a wonderful teaching tool for scaffolding for your students and by being able to create instructional videos and putting that material online. Access to materials for development. Yeah, so we have this thing that is called copyright, and we have the other side of that that's called fair use. When you take 537 with me, you'll understand exactly how we treat that. But obviously you can take any DVD commercially made and you can rip the DVD and make it into a video file that you can load into either Movie Maker or iMovie. So that process can happen. You just have to worry about the legalities of how you're disseminating the material. If it stays in your classroom, I'd see it as fair use. Outside of your classroom in terms of disseminating to the world, then you've actively engaged in bootlegging, whether you're gaining profit or not. Strategies to assessing the group and individual performance is always a struggle for us, so that's why you have to be working face-to-face with the groups constantly to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing and everybody's assigned a role.